She wanted me to sign over the controlling shares of the company I built with 35 years of my life. I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened that night. I am not a man who loses his temper easily. My late wife, Margaret, used to say I had the patience of a man who had already won every argument he would ever have. She was not wrong. I learned long ago that silence is the sharpest instrument in any room. You do not need to shout when you have already done the work. My name is Robert, and I am 65 years old. I spent the better part of 4 decades building Caldwell & Sons Construction from a 2-truck operation out of a rented garage in Columbus, Ohio, into a regional firm with contracts across 6 states. I did not inherit money. I did not have a mentor who handed me clients or opened doors. I had a work ethic that bordered on self-destruction in my 30s. A wife who kept the household from falling apart while I kept the business from doing the same. And a belief that if you showed up every single day and did honest work, eventually the numbers would reflect it. They did. By the time I turned 60, the company was worth more than I could have imagined standing in that garage in 1990. I had a daughter, Claire, who I put through the University of Michigan. I had a grandson, Oliver, who was 4 years old and already had more personality than most adults I knew. And I had a son-in-law named Derek, who Claire had married 6 years ago at a ceremony I paid for in full, including the rehearsal dinner, the floral arrangements, the open bar that his college friends treated like a personal challenge, and the hotel block for his family, who flew in from Charlotte and stayed for 4 nights. I want to be clear about something. I did not resent paying for any of it. That was my daughter's wedding. You do not put a ledger next to your child's happiness and start calculating. But I want you to understand the arithmetic of what I had given, because it matters for what comes later. After the wedding, Derek came to work for the company. This was Claire's suggestion, and I agreed because I believed in keeping family close and because Derek had a background in project management that was, on paper, genuinely useful. He was sharp. I will give him that. He learned the business quickly, and within 2 years, he was running the commercial division. I gave him a salary that put him in the top 5% of earners in our county. I gave him a company truck, an expense account, and an office 3 doors down from mine. What I did not give him was what he eventually decided he deserved. The night I am about to describe was a Saturday in October. I had organized what my assistant, Patricia, called the event of the decade, a gala dinner at the Worthington Grand Ballroom, to celebrate 2 things simultaneously: the 35th anniversary of Caldwell & Sons and my 65th birthday. Patricia had spent 4 months coordinating it. We had 180 guests, long-term clients, subcontractors who had been with us since the beginning, city officials, old friends, my brother and his wife who drove up from Kentucky. The room was extraordinary. Patricia has a gift for these things. There were round tables with white linens, a live band playing in the corner, a custom display along the back wall with photographs from the company's history, the garage, the first commercial build, the ribbon cuttings, Margaret smiling at the camera at every single milestone. I paid for Derek's parents to fly in from Charlotte and stay at the hotel for the weekend. I paid for their dinner. I paid for their room service Saturday morning. I mention this not to sound magnanimous, but because you need to know the full picture. The evening started well. I moved through the room the way you do at these things, shaking hands, accepting toasts, stopping at each table for a few minutes. I felt genuinely happy. That is not something I say casually. I am not a sentimental man by nature. But standing in that room, surrounded by 3.5 decades of work made visible, I felt something close to peace. Around 8 o'clock, after dinner had been served, the formal program began. Patricia had arranged a few short speeches. My business partner of 20 years, Frank, who made everyone laugh with a story about a flooded job site in 1997, a city councilman who had known me since the early days, and then Derek. I had not asked Derek to speak. He had volunteered, and Claire had passed along the request. And I had said yes, because he was family, and because I assumed he would say something brief and gracious. He walked to the podium in a suit I had not seen before, dark navy, well cut, the kind of suit a man wears when he wants to be taken seriously. He said some things about the company's history that were accurate enough, and then he paused. The pause was just long enough to change the air in the room. He said that 35 years was a remarkable run, and that every great founder eventually reaches the point where the question is not whether to pass the torch, but how. He said that the next chapter of Caldwell & Sons had already been written in his mind, and that he believed the family, and here he looked directly at me, needed to have a real conversation about what a leadership transition would look like. He said that the company's future depended on fresh thinking, on someone who understood the modern market, on leadership that was not. And here he smiled again at the room, not quite finished yet, but maybe ready to step into an advisory role. The room was very quiet. I sat at the head table. I had a glass of water in front of me, and I did not touch it. I looked at Derek. He was still smiling. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this. I understood immediately what was happening. This was not a speech. This was a performance designed to create public pressure. He knew I would not make a scene in front of 180 people. He had calculated that I would be too proud and too polite to respond, and that the silence would function as consent, that by the end of the night, with enough people having heard him frame it that way, I would find myself in a position where resistance looked like stubbornness, and stepping aside looked like wisdom. It was, I will admit, a reasonably intelligent play. After Derek finished, there was applause that had the confused, uncertain quality of applause that does not know what it is applauding. Frank caught my eye from across the room. I gave him a very small nod, and he gave me one back. We had been friends for 23 years. Some communications do not require words. I stood. The room looked at me. I walked to the podium, and Derek stepped aside, still smiling, and I put my hand briefly on his shoulder the way you would with anyone, and I thanked him for his remarks. I said I was deeply moved by the evening. I thanked Patricia. I thanked Frank. I thanked every client and contractor in the room by name, or close enough to it. Working from memory, which took about 4 minutes, and which I had practiced, because I believe that when someone gives you 35 years of their business, you can spend 4 minutes learning their name. I said that Caldwell & Sons was not going anywhere. I said the company's next chapter would be thoughtful and deliberate, and made on my timeline, not anyone else's. I smiled when I said it. The applause was different this time, more certain. I walked back to the head table and sat down, and the band started playing again, and that should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it. 40 minutes later, I was at a small table in the corner with Frank and a couple of old clients when Derek appeared. Claire was a few steps behind him. Derek sat down without being invited and leaned forward with his elbows on the table, and he said, quietly, but not quietly enough, that we needed to talk about what I had said at the podium. I told him this was not the time. He said it was exactly the time, and that I had embarrassed him in front of the entire room. I told him, calmly, that he had stepped into territory that was not his to step into, and that we could discuss it on Monday in the office. He told me I was being a stubborn old man who was too afraid to let go, and that I was holding the company hostage to my ego, and that Claire deserved better than watching me run her inheritance into the ground. Frank had gone very still beside me. The clients had quietly found reasons to look elsewhere. I said, one more time, that we were done talking until Monday. And then Derek said something that I will not repeat in full. But the final word of it was a word that no man has ever said to my face in 65 years of living. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I looked at Derek for a long moment. I looked at my daughter, who was standing behind him with her arms crossed, and who did not say a word, and who looked, if I am being precise about it, more annoyed with me than with her husband. I said, very quietly, that I hoped they enjoyed the rest of the evening, and I walked to the private dining room at the back of the ballroom that Patricia had reserved for me at the start of the evening, because Patricia had worked with me long enough to know that you always keep a quiet room available. I sat down at the small table in that room. The noise of the ballroom was muffled through the wall. I could hear the band starting something slow. I reached into my jacket pocket, and I took out my phone, and I made a call. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I want to tell you about the document that existed before that night. Because Derek had calculated wrong on one important point. He had assumed this was a new idea. He had assumed he was the first person to think about the future of Caldwell and Sons. He was not the first. Margaret died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The kind of timeline that does not give you enough time to say everything you need to say. In the weeks before she died, we talked about the company. We talked about Claire. We talked about Derek and Margaret, who had always been a better judge of character than I was, and who had said very little about Derek over the years that was enthusiastic. Said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Protect what you built, not because of ego, because it is the right thing for the people who depend on it." After Margaret died, I spent about a year in the kind of grief that does not look like grief from the outside. I went to the office. I made decisions. I answered emails, but that hollows you out from the inside. And then one morning I woke up and I thought about what she had said. I called Frank, and then I called our attorney, a woman named Susan Chen, who has handled the company's legal affairs for 15 years, and who is one of the most precise thinkers I have ever encountered. Susan and I spent the better part of 6 months restructuring the ownership of the company. I moved the controlling shares into a trust. The trust had specific conditions governing any transfer of ownership or decision-making authority. There was a board of 3, myself, Frank, and an independent member Susan had recommended. No single individual, including any family member, could acquire a controlling position without a unanimous vote of the board. I also reviewed every employment contract, every company vehicle agreement, every expense account authorization. Susan prepared amendment documents for each of them that could be executed on short notice. I did not tell Derek any of this. I did not tell Claire. I told Patricia, because Patricia needed to know in case something happened to me. And I told Frank, because Frank was on the board. And because keeping something that significant from your business partner of 23 years is not something I am capable of doing. So when I sat in that private dining room on a Saturday night in October and made a 4-minute phone call, I was not improvising. I was executing a plan that had been in place for 18 months. The person I called was Susan. I told her it was time. She said she would be there in 20 minutes. She had been at a dinner of her own. She had known this call might come eventually, and she had kept herself available in a general way, the way good attorneys do when they know their clients well. I sat in that room and I did not feel angry. I want to be honest about that. I had moved through angry at some point earlier in the evening and come out the other side into something cooler and more deliberate. I thought about the garage in 1990. I thought about the first winter we almost went under, when Margaret went back to work as a school administrator so we could make payroll. I thought about the apprentices who had come through the company over the years and gone on to start their own firms. I thought about Oliver, 4 years old, who deserved a grandfather who had not simply handed everything over because someone had decided the timing was right. I thought about Derek's face at the podium and the confidence in it, and I felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite satisfaction, but somewhere between the two. 18 minutes after I made the call, Patricia knocked on the door of the private room and opened it, and she said, very quietly, that there was someone at the ballroom entrance asking for me. I walked back through the ballroom. The party was still going, the band was playing. People were at the bar, and the room had the slightly loosened quality of a party an hour past its peak. I passed several tables and nodded at people I recognized. I passed Derek and Claire's table. Derek had his back to me. Claire saw me and said nothing. I walked to the entrance of the ballroom. Susan Chen was standing in the doorway in a dark coat, her briefcase at her side, her expression entirely professional. She is a small woman in her mid-50s who has the quality of making every room feel more organized simply by entering it. Behind her, 2 members of her firm stood with a document case. I walked out of the ballroom into the corridor with her, and we sat at a small seating area near the elevators, and she laid the documents on the table in front of me, and we went through them item by item. It took 31 minutes. The employment contract amendment, removing Derek from his position as head of the commercial division, with 60 days' notice, as required by his agreement, effective that Monday. The company vehicle authorization, revoked. The housing allowance I had been paying a supplemental allowance into a joint account that Claire and Derek shared. Something I had set up 5 years ago when Oliver was born. Terminated. I signed each document where Susan indicated. She countersigned as witness. Her colleagues dated and notarized. Susan looked at me when we were finished and said, "Are you sure about all of this?" I told her I had been sure for 18 months. I was just waiting for the right occasion. She allowed herself a small smile at that. She said she would file everything first thing Monday morning and that Derek would receive formal notification by the end of business. I thanked her. She said she was sorry it had come to this. I said I was not sure. Sorry was quite the right word. She nodded, which is the closest Susan Chen comes to laughing. I walked back into the ballroom. The band was playing a song Margaret had loved, which may or may not have been a coincidence, but which I chose to take as something. I poured myself a drink at the bar and found Frank, and we stood against the wall watching the room the way you do when you have known someone long enough that you do not need to fill every silence. Frank said, "Done?" I said, "Done." He raised his glass. I raised mine. The following Monday I was at my desk at 7:15 in the morning, which is my normal time. Patricia brought coffee at 7:30. At 9 o'clock, Susan's office sent the formal notification to Derek's company email and to his home address. At 9:47, my cell phone rang. It was Claire. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was 5 minutes and 30 seconds long, and I listened to all of it. Because she is my daughter, and she deserved that. She was upset. She said I had humiliated Derek. She said I had blindsided them. She said I was doing this out of spite because I could not accept that Derek had good ideas about the company's future. She did not say anything about what Derek had said to me on Saturday night. I called her back in the afternoon. I told her I loved her. I told her I would always love her. I told her that what happened on Saturday night was a line I was not willing to step back over, and that Derek's employment and his access to company resources had nothing to do with my relationship with her or with Oliver. I told her that if she wanted to have a real conversation, I was available for dinner on Thursday. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I had made this decision before Saturday. I told her the honest answer, which was yes. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Dad, how long have you been planning this?" I told her, "Long enough." She did not come to dinner on Thursday. She did come. With Oliver. About 3 weeks later. Without Derek. And we sat at my kitchen table and ate the pot roast I had made Margaret's recipe, the one I have been making since I learned it from her in 1987. And Oliver ate approximately 4 bites and then wanted to go look at the photographs in the living room, which he always does, always stopping at the same photograph of Margaret holding him as a newborn, pointing at it with great authority and saying, "Grandma, the way 4-year-olds announce things they have already decided." Claire and I talked for a long time that night. Not everything was resolved. Some things do not resolve quickly. And I am not a man who mistakes speed for progress. But we talked the way we had not talked in several years. And at some point, she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, I think I knew for a while that something was wrong. And I kept telling myself it was just Derek being ambitious. I did not say anything. Sometimes the right thing to do when someone says something true and difficult is to let it sit. Derek retained a lawyer who sent Susan a letter suggesting that the termination process had not followed proper procedure. Susan replied with 11 pages of documentation demonstrating that it had followed procedure precisely. We did not hear from Derek's lawyer again. The housing allowance had been in Claire's name as well as Derek's, technically, so I handled that separately. I set up a new account for Claire directly, an amount that was reasonable and that was hers alone, structured in a way that was not accessible to a joint account holder. Susan's idea. A good one. I want to tell you something about the company, because I think it matters. In the weeks after all of this, I spent a lot of time at the office. Not hiding. I have never been someone who hides but working. I was present in a way I had perhaps not been present for a couple of years, when I had started to ease back and let Derek run more of the day-to-day. I walked the job sites. I took client calls. I sat with the project managers and listened to what was working and what was not. What I found was a company that was fundamentally sound. The people were good. The work was honest. There were some process decisions Derek had made in the commercial division that I disagreed with, some corners cut, some relationships with long-time subcontractors that had gone cold, but nothing that could not be fixed. Frank and I hired a new division head in December, a woman named Teresa, who had come up through a competitor and who had a reputation for being meticulous and fair. She was a better fit than Derek had been in ways that had nothing to do with Saturday night. The company's next chapter is going to be fine. I am confident of that in a way I was not entirely confident of a year ago. I still attend Oliver's soccer games on Saturday mornings. He is not a particularly skilled soccer player yet, but he runs with absolute conviction, which I find very relatable. Claire brings him. Derek has not been at the games I have attended. I do not ask about him. That is a conversation for another time, or possibly for no time. Some things do not need to be narrated to their conclusion. What I will tell you is this. On a night in October, in a ballroom I had paid for, in front of 180 people who had watched me build something over 35 years, a man stood at a podium and decided that patience was weakness and generosity was surrender. He calculated that I would be too old, too proud, or too sentimental to respond. He miscalculated. I have been asked, since then, whether I regret any of it. I think about that question. I think about whether I should have seen it coming sooner. I think about the years I gave Derek the benefit of a doubt I might have spent more carefully. I think about Margaret, who saw something in his eyes that I was too busy to look for. I do not regret the decisions I made. I regret that they were necessary. There is a difference. If you are in a situation like this, if someone in your life has mistaken your patience for passivity, your generosity for weakness, I want you to hear something. The document you need does not have to be written in a crisis. The clearest thinking I did was on an ordinary Thursday morning, 18 months before any of this, when I sat across from Susan Chen and said, "Let's protect what matters. Quiet preparation is not coldness. It is care. It is the most serious kind of love for the thing you have built and the people who depend on it." I still drive past that garage on Delmont Street sometimes. It is a coffee shop now. The building is the same. The same low roof line. The same double-wide doors where I used to back the truck in at 5 in the morning. I do not stop. I just drive past and let it remind me where the story started. The story is not over. It is just in a different chapter than some people expected. Tell me in the comments if someone in your family publicly tried to take what you spent a lifetime building. What would you do? Would you give them a second chance? Or would you protect what is yours?